Okay, so welcome to the Grounded and Growing podcast. This is the first official episode, so that's pretty exciting. And we have Emma here with us today. Emma and I met not that long ago.
It was a year ago? Not even a year ago. It was like last summer.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyways, we met through some mutual friends.
It's like 8 months ago.
Yeah, it feels like longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, we met through some mutual friends, and she's just become a role model in my life and someone that I look up to. So I thought it'd be fun to have her on for the first episode. So I guess I should talk a little bit about like what the name means. I decided to call the podcast Grounded and Growing because I think that it's important to talk about how we've gotten to a place in our lives like where we're grounded now, and just like as Christians how we've become grounded in our relationship with Jesus, but also that we're all still growing and still learning, obviously. Yes. So yeah, and I just thought it'd be fun because I have a lot of conversations with people and get a lot of good advice, so I thought it'd be fun to share that with whoever wants to listen or watch or whatever. So yeah,
I think it's really cool because the part of like the grounded and growing, I love that because we're always learning. Like as soon as we think that we've learned something, like, oh yeah, I got this down, like it turns out like we've been tested and it's like, okay, no, actually I still need to work on patience. Like we're always going to be working through and growing in everything that we do.
Yeah.
And because we're imperfect people, we're never going to perfect something. Like it's just how we are as sinners. So yeah, I love that.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to talk about relationships. Okay, so I am going to start every episode with who has had the biggest influence on your life. I'm going to ask everyone, so we're going to get lots of different things. But who has had the biggest influence on your life?
So, this is I love this question, but I also have a hard time answering it because I feel like my answer has changed throughout the years. Yeah. Like throughout different phases of my life, but I would say that my mom has had the biggest influence, mainly over the past like 3 to 4 years of my life, and also because she's my mom, and you know, but there's specific things about her that I want to like, that I strive to become, and I wrote this down because I knew I was not going to be able to reference it right off the top of my head. So I feel like I've realized, especially ever since like going into dating and like being really intentional, like how important it is to be the Proverbs 31 woman. And I feel like my mom has always like embodied that super well. I don't know if you know that verse.
Yeah, I love that verse.
Okay,
yeah. So
I would read it, but I don't want to have to spend 20 minutes reading.
Go read it.
Read Proverbs 31, verse 10 through 31. And it talks about exactly how like the woman should be, and like she should be able to like be this like, just talks about the attributes and the characteristics and the things that she's able to do. And I think that's really cool because the Bible really is our handybook for life. And so it's really cool to be like, instead of seeing yourself as like, oh, I'm just waiting to see who I'm gonna become, it's like, that's not how it works. And the Bible tells us the type of women we should be. So I think that's really cool that we can use that as an outline for how we like decide to spend our time and the areas we want to grow in. So I would say my mom's had the biggest influence because I feel like she embodies that really well. So yeah.
Nice. That's good. Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, there needs to be a Proverbs 32 for guys, because I was like, this is such a good book idea, because I'm like, someone could write a book called Proverbs 32, and it's like for guys. Yeah. Because I feel like we're lucky that we get a really clear, like, for women, you know? But I don't know. Yeah, I love that chapter because it just like really outlines it well.
Yeah, there's definitely like certain like verses and chapters throughout the Bible that do talk about like the men and stuff, but it's not like the whole chapter is like, and he shall. It's totally structured different, but there's different things like he shall have self-control and he will like all these different things, but it's a little
harder to find.
It's harder to find those pieces, and they're kind of like scattered, especially like throughout the whole New Testament. Especially like in the letters, you'll find it a lot, but with the letters of Paul. So, but still, it's hard to find. It's not like you can be like, oh, the Proverbs 32 man. Like, that's not how it is. Yeah. But I'd be really cool if someone like wrote a book that was called the Proverbs 32, and it had like all those pieces like put together. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. Someone do it. Okay.
Yes, someone do it, please.
Yeah.
Maybe we will one day.
Yeah.
We will be the people. Or maybe there already is a book out there.
Maybe. Probably.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyways, so we're going to be touching on relationships mostly. And Emma has some stories and some good advice for relationships.
Oh, man.
I think everyone just loves a good love story. And she's recently married, so that's exciting. Yep,
6
show
months.
the ring,
6
yeah.
months.
Yeah, and her and her husband are amazing, Eric. So,
Yeah.
do you want to just give, like, some background to, like, you and Eric and how that happened?
Yes. So, the story could either be, like, 7 minutes long or, like, an hour long.
Okay.
I'm going to try and keep it short because I just think there's just so many cool ways in which God worked in both of our lives as individuals before, like, bringing us together. I feel like there's so many really cool ways in which the Lord worked that, like, I would not have seen or noticed until we did meet, and then it was like, wow, God was doing all these things behind the scene, and I had no clue. So after coming out of a really serious relationship that had lasted almost a year and a half, I think. It's so weird thinking about it right now because it feels like a different lifetime ago. But anyway, so coming out of that, it was really difficult. It was very abusive, very, it really changed. I'm a very different person now than who I was then. But coming out of that, I almost felt like there was no hope. I was like, whatever, all guys are like this, and like, or it's gonna be really hard to find the kind of guy I would want to spend my life with. Because after coming out of that, my standards being so low, I was like, they're gonna be super high now. So my perspective had totally changed. And I was like, there's no guy that's gonna meet my standards, and that's okay. So jump forward just a few months, and one of my friends had been like, hey, there's someone I want you to meet, and I was like, no way, like, I'm going total single woman mode, and next thing I knew, we followed him on Instagram, and now we're married, so, no, but there's more to it. But there's just crazy things, like, that the Lord did. We've gone to the same church. When we met, I'd been going for 2 years. And I'd never seen him in those 2 years, ever. And he's the drummer, and I never noticed him. And I think that's really cool, like, how God completely, like, covered my eyes and was like, you're not going to see him until I want you to see him. So I thought that was, like, a really cool thing. I'd never experienced anything like that. But there were also so many other instances. Like, we went to the same coffee shop for years.
Really?
Years. Yeah.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, we'd go to the same coffee shop, the same gym, like, and a couple other things. And I was like, how did we never bump into each other?
It's so funny.
So I was like, this is a total God thing. Like, when we finally met, it was like, whoa. Like, it almost made it that much more, like, of a sign from God that it was like, hey, this is the one I want you to marry. And so... Yeah. So we went on our first date, and it was perfect. And I knew that night after I got home, I was like, I love him. Like, and I couldn't explain it because I was like, you know, people put such a time, like, limit or a time frame on what you should take to heal from a previous relationship, which I think is ridiculous. People would say, like, oh, you need at least a year before you're ready to move on to your next serious relationship. And I think that's total crap. Yeah. Because, like, the Lord can do immaculate healing to people who, like, completely surrender to him. That doesn't mean that there's no hard days, but, like, God can do amazing healing in that. And so I almost, like, hindered myself from being able to, like, go out with him and have a relationship with him because I was convinced that, like, oh, well, not enough time has passed. So, a piece of advice for anyone, like, it's between you and the Lord, and no one can tell you how much time you need before you're ready to, like, date again or whatever it is. And even when it comes to dating and getting married, like, again, that's between you and the Lord. There is no time, like, specific time limit. Like, oh, you have to date for at least a year before you can get engaged. Obviously, if you're 15 and you're like, that's totally different. But if you're both adults Like, it's not up to anyone else. So, we met and got married in 8 months. And it's the best decision I've ever made, aside from accepting the Lord.
Of course.
Obviously. So, yeah. I don't know what else to say. That's kind of our love story.
Yeah.
I was his first everything.
Yeah.
Which was really sweet. So he waited 24 years to kiss a girl, to hold her hand, like all those things. That was really sweet. And I was like, wow. And it kind of made me feel almost like ashamed, like I didn't. But that's where God's grace comes in and is like overpowers those things. It's like, it's okay because I still give good gifts regardless of the choices you make. So I still don't feel deserving of Eric because he's amazing, but I'm very grateful for him every day.
Yeah, that's so cute. Yeah, I love you guys. I think one of the biggest things that I've like taken away from us talking about it in the past is that you said you're never 100% ready for anything. And I was like, yeah, like that's so right. You kind of just have to go for it. And also that it's not about anyone else. It's about you and God, and like your story and your relationships and your thoughts and emotions are different than everyone else's. And so you might not feel 100% ready, but if you have the Lord with you, you can do it, and he's bigger than any of those things. So I think that's like one of my biggest takeaways from us talking about it. It's just like, it's not really about what other people expect because it's your life. And if God's leading that.
And people don't know like your relationship with the Lord and what the Lord is telling you. People around you won't know that. Obviously, like, if you are not actually pursuing the Lord and you're like, God is telling me this, like, people on the outside who are believers will know when someone is like seeking the Lord, based off of their fruits, based off of like the way they live their life. So in that case, like, it's not up to anyone else. Obviously, if you're going to seek wise counsel and they have like thought and prayed over it and they feel convicted about a choice you're going to make, then like there is that too, because the heart is so easily deceived. And so we still need to keep that in mind, but ultimately, like, you're never going to be ready, like 100% ready for anything, because we're sinners and we're afraid. And that's where that comes from. It comes from fear, like not being ready. So
it's good. That in mind, talked a little bit about previous relationship. So what were some obvious differences that you noticed initially, and then things that like you didn't notice quite so initially? Because I think you also said some things about like signs from God and like knowing it's from God. I think a lot of people struggle with that, and like I struggle with that too, just knowing like, is this from God or is it not from God, and like not knowing if what you're hearing and feeling is yourself or if it's God, you know? So what were some like things that were super different between previous relationships and then Eric?
There's a lot. I feel like it's polar opposite, like completely, which is sad because those are the choices I made. But so I feel like one of those important things when you're looking to date someone, and if they're like, I don't know if I want to say like, oh, marriage material, but we date for with the intention to marry. At least I do. And I think that's the most biblical way to do it, because I mean the Bible doesn't even talk about dating. So, but dating is with intention to get to know them on a deeper level, with the intention to marry them. So, with that, throughout the whole time Eric and I were dating, one of the first things I did that was different was that I was like actually like seeking confirmation before I proceeded in any way, because from my previous relationship, I got so hurt and I was really afraid that he was lying about who he was, so I was really on guard. So like I prayed 24/7, like, God, give me confirmation through the people around me that like he is who he says he is. And sure enough, like, God will back up everything that's from him with confirmation. Like, and not just like I saw it in a dream. Like, people actually came and talked to me. Like, people I'd never met before that like knew him would be like, I would meet them for the first time and they're like, I'm not even kidding. It'd be like, oh, hi, I'm so-and-so. Are you Eric's girlfriend? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, my goodness, he's so amazing. Like, he is just so kind to everyone, and he's such a servant. Like, they would just, like, start naming, like, specific things about him that I was, like, worried about or I wasn't sure about. And so that gave so much peace and confirmation that, like, okay, he is who he says he is, and I can see it. Like, I see that he is so honorable to everyone, and especially women. Like, and it just, like, blew my mind. I was like, what in the world? Like, guys aren't actually, like, that good. Like, they don't get that good. So that was a huge difference just in, like, how I responded to the situation, and how, like, I saw him. And I was trying to be totally honest with myself, because I feel like when you start dating, you want them to be the right one. You want them to be the good one. And so you, like, try and convince yourself that even, like, when you see that something that could be a red flag, you're like, well, is it really a red flag? Like, you start to, like, change your mind. And that's just how it is. That's how we are. Like, we want to see the good, and we want to believe that they are exactly who we want them to be, which isn't a bad thing. But, like, when you're dating for the intention of marriage, like, you don't want to oversee those red flags, because if you marry them, you're married to them, and those things don't just go away, you know?
How do you know if it's, like, a red flag or if it's, like, you just overthinking something, though?
Well, it depends on what it is. Like, give me an example. What's coming to mind right now? Because sometimes it's a maturity thing. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Like, if you're, like, dating someone who's, like, especially, like, younger than 20, or especially younger than 18, like, there's a lot of maturity things that, like, will change over time. But there's, like, some characteristic things that are, like, bad. Like, if they're overly aggressive, or they're, like, really harsh and mean, like, those are things you're like, that could turn into something way bigger. Yeah. And so that would be, like, considered a red flag. Or, like, if they're mean to their mom or their sisters, like, that's kind of, like,
not good.
It's not good. Like, because if that's how he's going to treat the other women in his life, what makes you think that he's going to treat you any different in 5 years? You know?
So red flags, like, something that you can see growing into a bigger problem, whereas overthinking something, because I think of, like, things where, you know, he'll say, oh, like, this is something that I struggle with, but, like, I'm working on it and I'm praying through it, and it's like, okay, well, that is good, you know? And or, like, I think him recognizing, like, oh, there's an issue here, or like, this is something I need to work through or mature in, that is good. But then I, like, take to myself and I'm like, but what if, like, it doesn't change and, like, all this stuff? And I think that's where the overthinking comes in. But I guess just, like, trusting God in that, because then I start to, like, kind of undermine the confirmation that God gave me, you know? And I'm like, well, I don't know. But then I'm like, wait, no, that's just me. But, I think, just, like, other relationships, like, seeing the red flags were things that I was like, this could be a big issue. Like, this could get bigger. And then things that I see, like, now, I'm like, oh, yeah, this is something we're working on. And, like, working through as individuals and in a relationship with God. And it's like, that's a lot healthier than being like, I don't know if this can be fixed. I mean, not that it can't be fixed, because God changes people, but just, like, not something that you necessarily want to feel like you have to fix.
Yeah, totally. You know? So, again, like, if you feel, like, convicted, and, you know, we can feel, like, overthink things, but, like, conviction is different than, like, overthinking something and being afraid. Like, conviction is, like, that gut, like, feeling when you're like, this is morally wrong, or, like, I just feel like the Lord is telling me, don't do this right now, like, or it's not for me. So there's, like, I feel like, you know, when you're, like, feel convicted. It's like when you steal something from the store. If you do, you know, you feel, like, wrong as you're walking away. You're like, I didn't pay for this. It's not mine. Like, you feel convicted. Like, you did something that was wrong. That's not really a great analogy, but we're going to go with it. So, like, in that case,
I think that makes sense. It feels wrong. It doesn't, not scary. Like, if it's, like, you're nervous, that's different than if it feels, like, wrong. Yeah, you know? Totally. Yeah. And it's really important within relationships to be open and honest, because the devil works in the dark. He works in the secrets. And so if you're able to be honest about, like, your struggles
and willing to like work through it, and being willing to be called out is the hardest part. But like if you're willing to like take people's word for it when they're like, hey, you need to work on this, like being able to like take that and be willing to work on it is a huge maturity thing. Because we don't, as humans, we don't like being told that there's something wrong with us. And not that there's something wrong with us, but that we can work through something, that we're not being our best. And so I wouldn't call that a red flag. If a guy were to be like, hey, I struggle with pornography, but I'm working on it, then like, okay, that's a great thing that they're being honest, because that's also like one of the biggest things that destroys marriages is pornography, because pornography leads to so many other things, can easily lead to cheating and all that whole, it's a whole new world of sin. And so when you're able to be honest, like the truth will set you free. And it's true. Like I cannot say how many there's been countless times where I've felt like I'm not lying to people, but there's just something that's in the dark that needs to be brought to the light. And so when we bring sin to the light, it has the hold that it has on us is so much looser, and it's so much easier to conquer sin when we don't keep it to ourselves. And so when it comes to like overcoming sin and all that, like it's just so important to bring it to the light, but also be careful who you bring those things into the light to, because some people are not your friend, and they'll use those things against you. Sorry, this isn't really about relationships.
No, I think it
friendships, but it's good. It's important, like, because it will benefit your relationship when you're careful with who you confide in regards to like your struggles and that whole world of things. So
no, I think that's good, because like in relationships, I think that's a good way to know if it's a healthy relationship, if you can call each other out in a way that's respectful and like helpful. And I think if you love that person and you trust them when they tell you that, it's coming from a place of I love you and I want to help you and I'm praying for you through this and I'm walking with you through this, and like that's a lot different than, hey, you need to fix this so that you can fix our relationship. Like that's not a relationship. A relationship is coming together and working through it together, So I think there's that definitely connects, and like
totally. Another thing with that is that we don't always, like, when we see something in someone that we are like, they need to work on that. The power of prayer without having to say a word to that person is incredible. And the Bible talks about it. I did not actually mark this down because I didn't think about it.
We could do a whole thing on prayer.
But I think it's I want to say it's in 1 Peter or 2 Peter.
Okay.
I want to say that. And it talks about how, and this is between husbands and wives, but like still, I think the same principle applies. But it talks about how the woman can win. Well, this is pertaining to like the unbeliever, the woman, the believer who's married to the unbeliever, and how the Spirit can win over the husband's heart through the power of prayer of the wife. And I think that can relate to relationships too, whether you're dating or you're married, or your family, if it's your sibling or an aunt or a parent, like there's so much power in prayer, and how we oftentimes don't even need to say anything to that person, because like God does so much that we can't do, and sometimes when we say something, it almost hinders that person to not want to change. Because they feel like, oh, I'm just not good enough. It can almost make them take a step back. So we need to be careful on when we say the things that we do, and if it's something that God can convict them of on his own,
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, the Lord does use us to communicate with our boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, family. But also, like, I think it's important to, like, always seek the Lord first before bringing those things up.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like, what does this person need? Does this person need me to tell them? Do I need to pray for them without saying anything? Like, So it's tricky, but the Lord will give peace behind what he wants you to do.
Yeah.
And just because you have butterflies doesn't mean that it's not from the Lord. If anything, that's like you know what I mean? So people are like, oh, I have butterflies, so it's not peace, so it's not from the Lord. No, it's not. No. The Lord does back everything up with peace, because he's not a God of fear.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have fear, if it's fear driven, don't do it. But if it's
Mm-hmm.
peace driven, and it's driven from like the intention to help them,
mm-hmm.
and you feel like those butterflies, and like, okay, Lord, I probably should do it because I feel like that's God saying do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. With that and praying for people, I think it's good to pray for people and to pray with people. I've been like thinking
Yes.
a lot about prayer lately and like how that is so impactful in relationships
Mm-hmm.
and like how that really makes a difference. But
Mm-hmm.
one thing we're also talking about is setting boundaries, which
Mm-hmm.
is hard. And we were talking about the other day how people talk about physical boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and they say don't have sex until marriage, and that's pretty much all you get.
Yeah.
So, the rest, and like you said, the Bible doesn't talk about dating, which
Mm-hmm.
is hard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely a thing that I feel like Christians have had to figure out kind of what that looks like based on what we do get from the Bible. But not only should we be setting physical boundaries, but we should also be setting, emotional and spiritual boundaries, which
Yes.
people don't ever talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking about that with like praying for people and with people, I think there's like a level of spiritual boundaries for me. Like when I think of spiritual boundaries, I think it's good to have a relationship with God with that person.
Mm-hmm.
But if your relationship with God is only with that person, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
like, so I'm like reading through the Bible this year with someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if that was all I was doing for my relationship with God
Mm-hmm.
is like reading through the Bible with this person because they're keeping me accountable, that to me is not a good spiritual boundary because I'm not growing my relationship with God on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you're sharing everything that you're doing, all the prayers and all the thoughts and all the verses and all the things that like you're reading about, like yes, it's good to share those things,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like if you're sharing everything, it doesn't feel like you're setting a boundary there. It feels like you're kind of just letting your relationship with God be like known in a way that God wants it to be a little bit more private, a little bit more like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Does that make
I
sense?
think so. Yeah, because like we do each have our own individual relationship with the Lord, and some things are meant just for us, and some things are meant to be shared, and so it's important to like, and it's not like God's gonna cast fire on you if you share something that He didn't intend specifically for you to share, because sometimes the Lord reveals certain scriptures to us for other people, or so the Lord can use us to reach other people, which is a beautiful thing, but also like some things He wants to just give to you and reveal to you alone, but it's not like going to be a bad thing. Oftentimes He does that, reveal certain things to you that He later down the road wants you to share. Concerning relationships and stuff, I think I actually had a couple conversations with people about the whole spiritual boundaries, because I've heard so many, and not so many different things, but I've heard two different things. I've heard that being in the Word together and praying together is good, and I've heard that it's bad. And I was like
what? Yeah.
Okay, like, okay.
I know,
like, what does
so
that mean?
weird, yeah.
And I hadn't heard, like, why. Like, all the whys. And so I talked to more people over the last few days, and it really just came down to that if you, like, it sounds kind of silly, but, like, if spiritual intimacy is going to lead you to sexual intimacy, don't do it.
Okay.
And that's for across the whole board. You know, if being alone in a car with someone is going to lead to sexual desires and whatnot, don't do it. You know, like, don't put yourself in a position to where you're going to be tempted in a way that you will act out. You know what I mean?
Right.
But for some people, it does the opposite. Spiritual intimacy prevents sexual intimacy. And I believe that that's how it was meant to be, because it's, I mean, I wish I had this, like, written down. But, because I can understand both sides of it. Like, when you're so close with the Lord, especially, like, if you are married, like, we are one, and when we get filled up with the Lord, I can see how it could be like, oh, I just feel so full of the Lord. And when you are married, like, sex is a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. Like, it was meant for marriage, and it is a form of worship. Mm-hmm. And so I can totally see how, like, it could create sexual intimacy or turn into that. So I can understand that, mm-hmm. but also to the people who are not married, like, if it's going to lead you to that, don't do it. Right. But I think more often than not, it's really good and it's really healthy because, like, it's healthy to be in the Word with your friends, your family, your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. I think it's really, really important because, mm-hmm. like, this is our life. This is our instruction manual. Like, mm-hmm. if we were, like, not to talk about it with anyone, we'd be kind of confused. Yeah. Like, oh, yeah. Can you imagine, like, not being able to be like, hey, so-and-so, like, what does this mean? Or, like, what do you think this means? And so it's a beautiful thing that we get to be in the Word with people. Yeah. So, yeah. So for spiritual boundaries.
Depends. It
really just depends on the person. Mm-hmm. But I think it is better to be in the Word more than out of it. Unless you struggle with temptations. But then you should really pray about it and seek counsel and be like, hey, like, I want to go with this person, but I'm having struggles. Mm-hmm. And there are different outlets for being able to be in the Word with your boyfriend mm-hmm. or husband. Well, no, husband doesn't matter. I mean, for your boyfriend or girlfriend, like, there's church settings and there's Bible study settings that you can still be in the Word but not be alone, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's so interesting, though, how that, like, connects. Mm-hmm. And that does make sense. But I think I think for certain people it's harder. I think it's about intention going into it, I guess. Because I've never, not that you're intending, like, we're going to read our Bibles, then have sex. Like, that's not the intention. Yeah. But going into it with, like, when I read the Bible with him, I'm like, okay, I'm, like, excited to see what he learns. And, like, see him grow. And, like, I'm so excited to pray through this mm-hmm. for him and, like, talk about this with him. Mm-hmm. It's never for me, like, to make our relationship better. For me, I'm, like, setting that boundary, too. I'm like, okay, you know, and maybe I'm doing that subconsciously. Like, I didn't really think about it, but, like, setting that boundary where I'm not going into it reading the Bible with the intention that it'll help our relationship, but more that it'll help him as an individual, me as an individual. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah, because totally. I think, like, you know, it's a triangle thing, you know? Yeah. You're, like, both going towards God, then you'll, like, be closer. And so I think, I don't know, for me at least, that's, like, what I think about. It's making sense to me now that I, like, subconsciously maybe set that boundary and I'm, like, thinking of it as I want to watch him grow and I want to watch me grow and see how that works.
Yeah, and if you know that, like, you need to be equally yoked, like, that just makes sense to, like, respond in that way to be like, hey, well, we should both be reading our Bibles, but also, like, I know that, like, there still needs to be boundaries in place. Like, we don't have to think about it, but when we, like, when we know the Bible and we read the Bible and we know the outline for, like, mm-hmm. for relationships and how they're gonna work, like, the whole triangle thing, like, you gotta be equally yoked. You gotta be reading together. Like, if you're the only one reading and he's like, whatever, I'm just gonna and that really proves to their character when they're willing to be in the Word and decide to, like, live it out is really important. So, and the fact that, like, they want to spend that time doing that is also really important, and it really shows their character. Mm-hmm. Because think of, like, all the other things they could be doing. Yeah. But they choose to, like, be present with you or from afar and you're reading on your own through the Bible. Like, it really shows to their character and, like, their desires. It's also one of the things that I like about Eric is, you know, like, you can see the fruits of the Spirit in them because they spend time in the Word and he specifically, like, is very intentional about how he spends his time and who he spends his time with. And he surrounds himself with good people mm-hmm. who also want those good things, that want to spend time in the Word, that want to be men of God. Mm-hmm. And so it's important. I'm going to throw that in there, that little piece of advice. Look for a guy, if you're a girl, look for a guy that strives to be a man of God and surrounds himself with godly men. Even if they're 10, 15 years older than him. Like, mm-hmm. those are the kinds of guys that you want, that have counsel, that have mentors, that are, like, setting the example for them. Yeah. Is really important. So.
Emma's going to probably be on more episodes where we talk about things, but Yeah. Okay guys, so I'm on my computer right now, and that is why this camera quality is terrible if you're watching on YouTube, but I just wanted to say that Emma and I talked a lot, and I personally learned so much from our conversation. I feel like there was a lot in just this 35-40 minutes, so I wanted to split it up into two parts. So this is going to be the first part, and next week on Monday you can look forward to the second part. I just wanted to split it up because there's a lot of super great information in there, and I feel like it's good to kind of meditate on those things before diving into the next 35 minutes. So if you want to learn more about boundaries, gain some more perspective, we talked about God's grace and some other amazing things like that. And if you just want some more of Emma's amazing wisdom, then make sure you tune in next week on Monday, and I will have the next 35-40 minute episode up for you guys. So yeah, thank you so much for listening to this first part. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed making it, and I will see you guys next week. Bye! I'm feeling on top of the world, like nothing's ever gonna bring